we're looking at ensuring organizational longevity, a part of that is the participants and the people who are at that organization understanding how it works so that they can participate in the longevity. And that leads us to our second bullet: overseeing long and short-term strategic goals and planning. If the organization that you're working with does not have some sort of strategic goal or a long range plan, you'll hear people refer to them as strat plans or LRPs. You should ask to see those things. They're normally captured within a time frame. And so some long range plans are for 2 years, some are for 3, some go up to 5. Right now in our current environment, most organizations are looking at their long range plans only being 2 years because we don't know what the world is going to look like. And it's hard to plan for 5 years out. I would encourage you all to make sure you get PDF copies or some sort of documentation of your organization's long range plan. So you would ask the executive director and say, hey, where are we in the cycle of our long range plans? When I do trainings with nonprofits and even for-profit organizations, one of the first things I ask them is, so what year are you guys in your long range plan? Some are just at the beginning of a new long range plan because they had just ended one. Some of them are in the middle of a cycle. And so you want to talk to your organization about their long range plan or strategic plan. And if they don't have one, we want to encourage them to begin building one. And maybe after today's presentation, you'll even be able to participate in the development of a long range plan or a strategic plan if there's not already one at your organization. And so the next part is supporting the health of the organization, looking at risk management, and looking at the business model and how its overarching and ongoing finances are stabilized. So many individuals are parts of organizations that are primarily grant driven. And if an organization is grant driven, they oftentimes have a advancement person or somebody who's bringing in money for the grant. As a stakeholder in nonprofit organizations, fundraising is everybody's job. Financial stability is everybody's job, right? And so for these organizations, I'm slowing down again, Alejandra. I felt like I sped up again, so I apologize. Supporting the organizations, looking at those things that require money, a part of our job is to see opportunities. And so let's say there's a Wells Fargo near where your organization is. What's to stop you from walking in to Wells Fargo and say, hey, I'm a part of this community organization and we do A, B, C, and D. You have your elevator pitch already. All the modules that we worked on before now should be able to provide you with some evidence that you have the ability to do that, right? We talked about empowering communication. We talked about, engaging in these important discussions. And so being able to walk into a bank and say, we know that you guys have some social programming, and every single bank in this county has money that they have for social programming. It may not be a lot, but they have it. And so when we're talking about the financial stability of an organization, to be able to go and ask that question to that bank is really important. Michelle, can you go back to the previous slide, please? There was just one more bullet point, I think. Yep, one more bullet point. And so being able to pay attention to those risks are really important, and seeing how you participate in that. Finally, remaining aware of the fiduciary obligations of the organization. That means, what is this organizational responsible for? It has salaries that it has to pay. There may be community members that are reliant upon food services and so many different things. You don't have to think that you are, how do I say, breaking a boundary by asking about the financial viability of the organizations that you support. Many of us have been raised inside households or cultures where talking about money is taboo. When discussing money is something that brings up a lot of discomfort for us, right? On the flip side of that, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that went out of business because somebody didn't ask a question about finances. Somebody wasn't a good financial steward of the organization. And so you, as a supportive member of the community, it's your responsibility to ask questions about how the organization is viable financially, what types of things may need to be done to support a model of longevity for the institution if it's not there. How can you participate in fundraising, things like that, etc. We can move to the next slide, Michelle. Thank you. So mission statement alignment. A mission statement is a short statement of why an organization exists, what its overall goal is, and it's the identifying the goal of its operations, what kind of product or service it provides, its primary customer market, and its geographical region of operation. What you want to do is you want to be able to look at the mission statement of an organization and know exactly what that organization is about. So I would encourage everybody to go to some national nonprofit organizations like the Girl Scouts of America. The Girl Scouts of America has created a model as a nonprofit organization across the globe that has created a sustainable and financially rich model. When I say financially rich, I don't mean in the dollars that they bring about. I don't mean financially rich in the dollars they bring about, but inside of the work that they do. If you look at the mission statement of an organization like that, you know exactly what they're doing. You know exactly what they're about. You understand it. Everybody make sure that we're on mute, please.
1 second. Second. Amada, are you okay?
Oh.
Are you okay, Amada? Are you getting this?
I think I muted her by mistake.
No, I mean, she can give me a thumbs up. Amada is...
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, only I hear no interpretation. I need it in Spanish. She wants it in Spanish, so she can understand.
Okay, so Amada, there's a button at the bottom of the screen.
Uh-huh.
It's a globe.
Yeah.
There's a globe.
Uh-huh, yeah. I see a Spanish.
You should be able to click on that globe and it will come up English or Spanish.
Okay, I put Spanish, but don't. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
You got it?
Yeah, sí.
Okay.
And 1 second before you keep going, Doc.
Sí, le escucho. Gracias.
Okay, and before we get going again, I just want to do a check. Is there anybody else who isn't hearing the Spanish interpretation while Dr. Donald is talking? Because maybe she's not the only one who was having that problem. Is it, you're not getting any, everybody else is okay? Ruth and Alejandra? Okay. All right, great. All right, let's go.
All right. And so again, it is a part of your responsibility to hold our nonprofit leaders accountable to the items of finances. Again, because many of us have an anxiety about talking about money, many of us have been trained, if you will, to be very reluctant to talk about that, but it's our responsibility if we want the sustainability of our work, and that mission statement needs to align with that. One of the most important parts of the of a nonprofit world is this board of trustees. I sit on several boards of trustees in the county for different organizations. And the role of the board of trustees is literally to be the quote unquote boss or manager of the executive director. Excuse me. When you look at a nonprofit organization and you understand all of the work that goes into them, that executive director has a group of people that kind of support the outcomes as it relates to what the nonprofit can do, the direction that it's going to go in, and those individuals are really important. What I want you all to be able to do is to perhaps think about learning what you may need to do to sit on one of the boards, one of the board of trustees for your organization or even another organization. Somebody just asked, will we be sharing the slide deck? Michelle, we will, right? Yes, you all will get copies of these beautiful slides in order to reflect on the conversation and in order to kind of do some more digging. I would encourage you all to learn what would be the next steps for you to potentially serve on a board of trustees. It is the law in the state of California and in most other states that every nonprofit organization has a board of trustees. And you can learn about what that looks like. You can ask who's on the board. The website of every nonprofit organization is supposed to have its board membership listed there. I would encourage you all to take a look at those things and understand what board membership is, and if the board at your organization is functioning effectively or not. Now, who makes up the board? They're appointed or elected groups of individuals, and they have overall responsibility for the management of the organization. The Board of Trustees is typically the governing body, and they want to ensure the best interest of all the stakeholders in all types of management decisions. And so for me and the boards that I sit on, we approve the budget, for instance, for the year. The executive director brings the budget to the board, and we look at it and we approve it. We ask questions, we seek insight. And so board membership is really a wonderful way to ensure the sustainability of an organization. Raise your hand if you sit on any board. You can go down. I hope everybody knows that there is a reaction button at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you can raise your hand and we'll be able to see it. And perhaps when we get into our breakout groups, some of you can discuss some of that as a part of your discussion on some of the parts that you've taken in the organization as a board member, and maybe even encourage somebody on the line to seek out board membership at their organization. Next slide, please, Michelle. So the things that the board do is that they evaluate, reflect, and continue to develop methods used to achieve the organization's mission. That's why the mission of the organization is so important, because it should be the primary driving force of everything that that organization does. So let's say you're working at an organization and they make a decision that you feel is a little wonky. They start to participate in a program that you're kind of like, this doesn't seem to be who we are. A good way to go about finding that information out is asking them, how does this activity fit with our mission? And some of the language you often want to use is this mission aligned? Does this align with our mission as an organization? And those are some of the driving points when decisions are being made about an organization's next steps. Many of you have had to work hard with your organizations to kind of pivot to be able to do something a little bit differently during these current times of COVID. For instance, Michelle and this entire team has had to develop a new platform in order to make sure that we were able to complete the mission of this particular project. Many of you are also facing that exact same challenge. The Board of Trustees is the organization that works to support those outcomes, that ability to pivot away or make a different decision. Many of you are familiar with the Board of Supervisors for LA County. The Board of Supervisors, if the county was a nonprofit organization, the Board of Supervisors would be like the Board of Trustees. If, like I said, if LA County was a large nonprofit organization. And so you can look at some of the work of the Board of Supervisors for LA County, or go to their website. That would be another example of looking at the notes and looking at the minutes of those meetings to really understand the role of what a trustee does. In addition, many nonprofit organizations have posted on their websites what we call them trustee charters. And the trustee charters are those things that are driving the work of the board. And again, some organizations call these groups Board of Trustees. Other organizations call them board of directors, and they're the same thing most of the time. The board understand their roles within the organization, and they avoid staying too deeply into tactical or management decisions. And so it's not the board's role to say, you guys need to fire the accountant. It is the board's role to say, it seems like our accounting practices are not ethical, or it seems like our accounting practices are leading us into debt year over year. Does everybody understand the difference between those two? And so when we talk about having management and in the weeds, as people say at an organization, that's not the role of the board. The board sees from a few thousand feet up in the air and looks down and allows the executive director to do those management things. But it is your responsibility to say, well, the numbers of people we serve every year has fallen significantly, and we need to do something about that, and help to strategize how to do that. Any questions on board membership, on financial responsibility, or on mission? We've gone through kind of three major topics as it relates to the start of this discussion. That was your responsibility as a member to understand long-range plans and long-range goals, your ability to ask about those things, your ability to look at the financial responsibility of the organization, your ability to look at the mission, and your ability to understand how the Board of Trustees works. Any questions or comments on that? If you raise your hand, we can unmute you. And you don't have to have a question or comment either. Anything coming from the rooms where our Spanish family members are?
I see
Spanish speaking family members are, excuse me.
Miss Rita raised her hand, so we need to, I'll unmute her. I can do that. Go ahead, Miss Rita.
Okay. Is there any way we could have a tape on this? So
Rita, can you talk up a little bit? I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any way we could have a tape or a video of this discussion so we could have asked questions later, since we're not going to remember all of this stuff? And, oh, hold on. I gotta let the door open.
So I'll answer Rita's question when she comes back as well. But this session is, that was quick, Rita. This session is being recorded, Rita. And just like the slide deck, I believe that the team will send out the recording of this afterwards, because you're going to want to look at the slides again and maybe reflect on it. And when you go back to your organizations, be able to ask these questions that I'm telling you or sharing with you that might be important to ask your executive director. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome.
And Dr. Grant, we have one question in the chat. It says, does a board need a lawyer?
It's very, oh, that's a wonderful question. Such an important question. Most boards have a lawyer on the board. In fact, one of the boards that I'm on, there are two lawyers, a real estate attorney and a tax attorney. And so in addition to a board having a lawyer as a part of the board, the organization has to have its own lawyer. And what we want to do is discern between those two pieces, right? It's a really great question. So the lawyers that serve on boards of trustees, they are not the lawyers for the actual organization. They come to the board with a legal lens to help discuss things and to help advance the mission of the organization. But let's say if the organization was being sued or was suing someone else, that lawyer who was on the board would not be the lawyer that represents the organization in litigation or in a lawsuit. I hope that makes sense to everyone. I'll go through that one more time because it's such an important question. The answer has two parts. The question was, should there be a lawyer on a board of trustees? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally yes. The second part to that answer is that the lawyer is not the attorney for the organization, right? So if a lawyer volunteers to be on the board of your organization and says, yes, I would love to support the work you're doing as a board member, they may provide advice, they may provide their legal lens, but they would not represent the organization in legal matters. So it's a great question. What would be your advice to recruit a lawyer? What would be the benefit for he or her? It's a great question. The benefit of board participation is really the same for everybody who participates. It's a voluntary role, and you get to contribute to the sustainability of a nonprofit organization. So most people find people who have a passion for the work that they're doing, or people who are alumni of the organization, right? And so let's say you run a boys and girls after school type program, and one of the young kids who were a part of that program has now moved on, gone to law school, and is now a practicing attorney. That would be an example of someone who you would reach out to and say, we know that you have great value for this organization. We really need a board member with the law background on our board, and we're hoping that you would serve the 3 terms or whatever the terms are for your board. And so the benefit to being on a board is really for the sustainability of an organization. Anytime you're recruiting new board members, whether you're looking for an accountant, a lawyer, or whatever professional lens you want on that particular board, it's important to really sell the mission of the organization to that potential or prospective board member, because they have to care about the mission in order to provide you with the voluntary time that they're taking away from their family or their job or other projects. And so that's oftentimes how you get them there. Yeah, were there any other questions? I just looked at the chat and I think I spoke about that we do need a lawyer and the importance of getting there. Oh, minutes. Yes, we can talk about minutes. That's another really important component of this work. Minutes for nonprofit organizations are oftentimes considered legal documents, and this is important that you guys note. Every meeting, every board meeting, every official meeting of the nonprofit organization has to have minutes. Those minutes need to be structured in a professional manner and be readable. There's lots of organizations who even post the minutes to every meeting on their websites for full transparency. Not all organizations do that. It's important that you have a secretary on your board of trustees whose responsibility partly is in fact to take minutes for the organization. At each board meeting, the minutes of those of the previous meeting, they are looked at and they are approved, and they are identified for changes if there are any changes that need to occur from those minutes. So minutes are really critical, and they need to be maintained in a secure space. We'll take the next slide, please, Michelle. And so if you are a part of the organization, you can request to see the minutes of different meetings. Now, board minutes are not always available for public consumption. And so you may go to your executive director and you may ask for the board meeting minutes. They may say we're not allowed to share those. And that leads us directly into this next component right here, the bylaws. The first thing I'll say about the bylaws is that there needs to be an annual review. I am on one of the boards I sit on. I am the chair of Trustees and Governance. What that means is that I'm the individual on the board who has to pay attention to board terms of the people who get there, who are on the board, how long they stay on the board. I review the bylaws every year to make sure that they are up to date. I have to make sure that we're adapting them and adjusting them according to changes in the law. For instance, there was a recent change in the state of California nonprofit code that allowed certain types of virtual voting that it had not before. And so being able to pay attention to that, we then had to go in and amend our bylaws to reflect that. And there have been several other small legal changes that we've had to make. And so adapting and adjusting according to the changes, and consistently referencing the bylaws. Remember how I said earlier, when your organization is moving towards another project or another plan, and you want to ask, is this mission aligned? You also want to ask, is this consistent with our bylaws? Do our bylaws allow us to do this? Do our bylaws make it such that we have to get a vote from the entire membership of the organization? Or is this a decision that the Board of Trustees can make unilaterally? These are things that even though you may not be working directly on the bylaws, it's important that you are aware of them. Now, unlike the minutes, the bylaws are absolutely public information. You should be able to get access to your organization's bylaws very readily. And it's 2020 right now. If your bylaws are older than 10 years, you want to request that they be reviewed, amended, and adapted, because there have definitely been some changes in the last 10 years that would warrant an update for your bylaws. And so if you get your bylaws and you see, revised in 2008 or revised in 2009, you want to encourage your organization to do a heavy lift on reviewing the bylaws, and it would need a legal eye on it. It would be beneficial to have an attorney participate in that bylaw review, particularly if it's that old. We'll take the next slide, please, Michelle. So when we look at what top performing nonprofit organizations do, and Michelle, you can let me know when we're ready for the breakout rooms, or do we have it on here already? I'm sorry.
So I wanted the breakout rooms to happen a little later. So just move through this. I mean,
Okay.
you are, and then, I'll speak up at some point.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. And so when we look at what some of the top performing nonprofit organizations do, and I gave you the example earlier about the Boys and Girls Club, it's important to pay attention to nonprofit organizations that have been able to maintain sustainability across generations. When you think of the important work that you all are doing in the communities where you work, how would you feel if suddenly that nonprofit fell and was no longer able to serve all the people who you've been serving all these years? If it were suddenly not able to provide those services anymore, what would happen to those community members who rely upon you? So when we talk about top performing nonprofit organizations, we're literally talking about what has to be done for you all to be able to maintain sustainability such that the children of the children you serve right now could get those services if they so needed them. Now, for many of us, it would be a godsend if our organizations did not need to exist anymore, right? That means that whatever the particular structural ill or whatever the poverty or homelessness or hunger, that would mean that it went away, that our nonprofit organizations didn't need to exist anymore. But I think many of us have been around long enough to know that all these problems that we're working on addressing, they're still going to be here for years to come. And it doesn't look like many of them are getting better. I was jogging the other day, and I jogged past a homeless encampment. And when you think about all the stress that many of us are under right now, and you think about other communities who are already experiencing food insecurity, housing insecurity, how this hits them, right? It's easy for me to social distance in my house with my family and feel still connected to the world, right? I have, I guess this would be considered electronic privilege, whereby I am still able to connect to anybody who I want to connect with. Me and my buddies, we do Zoom happy hours. We get kids together on Zoom play dates and things like that. If you don't have technology privilege, is probably the better way to put it. If you don't have technology privilege, you can't social distance because we're social beings. So what does that mean for people who are unable to engage virtually? They're connecting, and there's danger in that, but there's also danger in not that, if that makes sense to you all, right? And so when we talk about looking at what top nonprofit organizations are doing right now, those are the organizations who have been able to go out and really, like I said, pivot again. The way that Sadio and Michelle and Sergio and that entire team was able to pivot right now to say the information that we're sharing with these community members is so important that we don't want to lose these last modules. What do we need to do to get back on track and get this done? Top performing nonprofit organizations, that's what they do. When we look at homeless serving organizations right now, they have created different programming in order to make those things work. There's some nonprofit foundations at sports teams who are now doing virtual practices for kids because they know that those families still need those services, even though they can't go to a ballpark together. And so when we're talking about what your organization is doing right now, you want to be able to say, we've committed to our goals and our objectives. They trace back to the mission. And even in times like these, we have found ways to provide service, even if it's not 100% of your services, even if it's not in the same time frame that you would like them to be in. You are still providing services, and you want to hold the group accountable. I see we just got a message, but I was not able to understand that in Spanish. And so please let me know if that's something we should address right away, and we will address the question.
No, it's not a question. It was just a message letting folks know in Spanish that the materials for this class will be sent out later today.
Awesome. Thank you. So another thing that's really important is data. Now, we talked about data in a previous discussion. We talked a little bit about making data-informed decisions and looking at data-informed strategies. One of the biggest losses for nonprofit organizations is their inability to evaluate what they're doing. Now, many of you at your organizations, you collect data and you have mountains and mountains and mountains of data, but you're not using that data to inform your decisions. Now, I'm going to say that again in a different way. Many of you know how many people you serve every year. Many of you know how many meals you've given out. Many of you know how you supported people transitioning back into the workforce after being incarcerated. However, you have those numbers and you don't even pay attention to whether they grew or declined, or break them down month after month to say, wow, we keep seeing steep losses during the month of June. What does that mean? And what do we need to do to address it? Looking at data and collecting data is only one part of the success of a nonprofit organization. Utilizing that data is truly the value of the data. Now, when we talk about the types of data that you all are collecting, I'd like for you to find out more from your executive directors, and maybe that's another question that you guys can ask in the group meeting, in the breakout groups, is how do you ask about the data that your organization is collecting? How do you know if it's even the data they should be collecting, right? And so let's say your organization only collects data on the number of people who you serve every year. That's great data, but it's not going to secure a grant for your money, grant dollars for you to move to the next level. What if you started collecting data on how your services change someone's behavior, right? And so let's say you were a nonprofit organization and your nonprofit organization was providing mental health training, not services, let's say training. You were training people to understand mental health and understand mental wellness and how to access services outside of your organization. You can count the number of people who came through your doors who you taught, but how much more valuable would it be if you had a list to say, of the 500 people we served last year, 300 of them accessed a mental health clinician that had never accessed mental health services before. Do you see the difference in those two types of data? One data set is saying we served 300 people, and that's awesome. The other data set is saying that we changed the behavior of 80% of people who participated in our work. We actually convinced people through this program to secure formal mental health services. That type of data provides a story that's very different than just saying we served 500 people this year. Now, is serving 500 people a notable effort? Absolutely. But can you seek out more robust data in order to demonstrate the effectiveness of the work that you all are doing in the community? How do you talk to the research people at your organization? Do you even know if there is a research or a evaluation leg of your organization? You may want to ask your executive director, hey, who's responsible for charting our outcomes here at our organization? Who's responsible for that? And if there's nobody there, you want to encourage them to do so. These are the examples that we're speaking of about empowering you to be able to ask those important questions. Some of the problems with nonprofits is that the people who participate in supporting them, they don't have an understanding of the structure, and so they're not able to hold the leadership accountable. What we want to do with this learning is to make sure that all stakeholders have the information to ask the right question. So I've given you guys the Blockbuster example several times throughout these series because it's one of my favorite examples. And so many of us remember walking through the aisles of Blockbuster 15, 20 years ago, looking for videos to rent and take home and never watch and pay the late fee for them when we return them 6 days later. Somebody came to Blockbuster and said, hey guys, I want you to know that it's going to be soon that nobody's going to be walking through your aisles looking for movies, because they're going to be able to go to a little box and get whatever they want. And then soon after that, they're going to be able to sit in their living rooms and press a button and get a movie that comes right onto their TV. Blockbuster said, no thanks, we're good. We're an organization that will always have customers because we always have. What didn't happen, and it's a little bit different because Blockbuster is a for-profit business, but they still have boards and for-profit businesses. They just work a little bit differently. There was nobody in that leadership role that was able to rely upon somebody who had a tech savviness to say, hey, these dudes are right. In 5 years, the digital wave is coming. And if we don't jump on it, we're going to lose out. The fact of the matter is that Netflix should really have been Blockbuster. But Blockbuster said, no, thank you. What is it that your organization is saying no thank you to right now that's going to make it such that your sustainability is gone? What is it that you're not asking? What is it that you're not understanding that 10 years from now, there's going to be no need for your organization? Not because the problem that you're serving no longer exists, because for our entire lifetime, poverty, homelessness, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, all these things are going to outlive us. And so your nonprofit organization needs to outlive you, because the mission that it's aimed at serving is going to still be relevant if you work it correctly. And so I'm just encouraging you not to allow your nonprofit organization to become Blockbuster. And all these things that we're talking about today gives you the tools to ask the right questions so that your leadership at the organization is able to say, oh, wow, you're right. We need to start thinking about that. When you say, oh, where do you keep the minutes from the meetings? They could be subpoenaed if we're ever in a lawsuit. And they say, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. You're right. Or when you say, oh, do you know our bylaws haven't been revised since 2002? There's legal accountability for not having that done. And the ED says, oh, you're right. Let's think about that. These are things that you are contributing to the maintenance and sustainability of your nonprofit organization. Those data metrics are really critical. And if there's nobody collecting data, I encourage you all to get to the board and let them know that this is not happening and it needs to happen. Next slide, please, Michelle. So other things that top performing boards do, they focus on ongoing board recruitment with the systemic process of developing a pipeline of board talent. Somebody asked earlier, should a board have a lawyer? The answer was yes. If you focus on board recruitment, what the goal is to do is to maintain that lawyer on the board for the whole time that you have the board. Now, you may have a board term limits that says each individual can only serve 3 years on the board or 5 years on the board, whatever that is. Those term out times, that means the time when the person is no longer eligible to serve on the board, they're very predictable. And so as the lawyer who is currently on the board has 2 years left, it's time to start recruiting for that person's replacement so that you always have an attorney represented on your board. Same thing may be with an accountant. You may always want to have a CPA on your board so that they can ask questions that you may not know to ask. Again, they won't serve as the organization's accountant because the organization will have its separate accountant and tax people, but having somebody with a financial lens on the board is really, really important. And so the ongoing recruitment of the board keeps the life of the organization, and you never want to lose sight of your board term outs. A good thing to pay attention to is the fact that sometimes if you fill a board all at one time, like let's say you got a brand new organization or an organization that just did a shift, and they bring in 8 new board members at one time. Guess what's also going to happen at the same time? All those board members are going to term out at the same time. And so now you have to pay attention to the fact that now you'll have a gap of 8 board members. That's why staggered membership is really important. You're adding new people to the board little by little, so you don't have this mass exodus of board members. Another important note to make: you may be having coffee with your executive director and they say, oh, we're going to add 10 new board members to the team this year. And you're like, wait a minute, you know that means that all those board members are also going to term out at the same time, and you'll be back with the same problem. And you may encourage them to say, well, why don't you do 4 this year, 4 next year, and then 2 the next year? And that may be a good plan to maintain sustainability of your board. Plan leadership succession in this exact same way, and assess the performance of people in leadership roles. I can't state this one highly enough. When we look at the leadership of an organization, it is critical to have a succession plan in place and to provide them with performance information, feedback, and leadership. So when I say the board of directors or the board is the boss or manager of the executive director, if there is no functioning board, the executive director can really just run rogue, and we never want that. I see 2 hands raised, and so I will take a moment to acknowledge those 2 hands. It looks like I see Renee and Patricia. And so Renee, I see your hand first. Would you like to go ahead? Or Renee, is that your old hand from the last raise? Patricia, did you just raise your hand?
Mine's is old.
Okay.
Renee.
Okay, we're going to take yours off, Renee. I want to lower your hand for you. I didn't know I had that type of power, but I just lowered your hand.
And Donald?
Yes.
So I think this might be a good place. It's a few minutes till 3. So
Okay.
I think it might be a good place for us to actually stop and do a small group discussion for a while.
Let's do that.
And so, in your small groups, take some time to talk with each other about what you've heard so far, right? Just take some time and think about what of this conversation, that either maybe seems like new information to you, what sort of questions do you think you have? So when you come back to the big group, we want to hear a little bit back, from each of you. Have one person from your group, designate one person to either share, a question or some feedback with us when we come back into the larger group.
Michelle, I want to also just add really quickly, also think about what might be a challenge to do that we've talked about today, so we can also maybe provide some tools for that. And so in addition to what Michelle's asking, think about some tips you may need to go into a discussion that you need to have. And as Michelle said, the whole group will have one representative, and we'll share that out when we come back to the larger group. Did Patricia have a question before we went to the small groups, Michelle, or is that an old hand?
That was her old hand, yeah.
Okay.
Her hand was already up.
Got it.
Okay.
It was a new hand. It was a new hand.
Oh,
I
it's your new
had
hand?
raised it twice.
Oh,
But whatever the time factor, it's okay. Whatever the time factor, I realize we're working on a schedule.
Patricia, go ahead and ask your question. And if I'm not able to answer it right now, I'm going to incorporate it into some of the responses when we come back. And so let me hear it, though, so I can be prepared for it.
Okay, you mentioned about duration in terms of board members. Okay, and with that being said, are there any, okay, let me back up. I work for a very large, nonprofit hospital, and it's a very well-known hospital here in the Southern California area.
I may be
And
on the board.
huh?
I was saying I'm on the board of a nonprofit hospital here.
Yeah, and here's the thing. When I learned that it was a nonprofit hospital because, I mean, their budget is multi-million dollars, multi-million dollars. And I, you know, but they shared with me, person shared with me the difference between with a nonprofit hospital is that the monies go back in as opposed to profit sharing. There's no, excuse me, you know, with stocks and all that. So the difference is, my question is in reference to, you mentioned about terms. Are there any organizations that you know of that are like, well, what comes to mind is like the current Supreme Court. They're on there for lifetime. Are there any nonprofit organizations that have
No, not
that
to
have
my
in their bylaws that have something set up like that?
not to my knowledge. It would be illegal, likely for a not. Sorry, Alejandra. It will likely be illegal for a nonprofit board to have a set of lifetime board members. Now, here's the caveat. Some boards do allow for board members to have turned out to become a trustee emirate, and that allows them to stay on the board without voting capacity usually, just to be a resource. But no, it's not like the federal judges where they get a lifetime appointment. That usually does not happen. And like I said, it's likely illegal in some places. I don't know that to be true because I'm not an attorney. But if it's not illegal, it's not a good idea. All right, so Masadio is gonna break us out into our breakout rooms. Michelle, about how long do we want to break out? Is it gonna be 5 minutes, 7 minutes? You're on mute.
We're going to go ahead and do 15 minutes so people have time to really talk to each other. Like I said, I do understand we're going a bit over today. And remember, the goal is, you know, we are recording this session. I'm going to have it edited and then we can upload it. So for those of you who aren't able to stay, please stay if you can so that we can engage everyone. But for those who may not be able to stay past our allotted time, then we will upload the complete, you know, session so that you can listen to it. So I want to make sure we have time for those of you who are with us to have a nice small group discussion. And then Dr. Grant will continue through the slides and go through them in detail. So that way we'll have all of that in the recording. And I know, and in that time, Dr. Grant can take a look at some of the questions that are in the chat, like Officer Hill had a question around minutes and things like that. So we can go ahead and address those when we come back. Okay, so Sadio, you can go ahead and break us out into our group. This is another first for our little team, so hopefully that will be a positive experience.
Okay. All right, everyone. We'll be opening the breakout rooms right now.
You have to click on joining the breakout room when the box pops up.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We're just waiting on the folks in the English room who are probably still just chatting it up.
And so, Dio, people are going to be prompted to select again their language again.
Okay, gotcha. Sergio, got you. Our friends from the English room, I think, will join us in just about 30 seconds. And here they come.
Necesito que me busques una hoja, una pluma para escribirte las tablas.
I know, I think everybody should have been, sorry guys. Everybody should have been joined back to the meeting,
Yes.
but I know we had to leave ours. It didn't bring us back immediately, so that was odd.
Okay, so everyone should be coming back in, and you should be prompted to select your language again. And so again, if you're English speaking, you will select English. And if you prefer to listen in Spanish, you'll select Spanish. And Michelle, we have Sergio who's going to facilitate, who's going to do the report back for the Spanish speaking group.
Uh-oh.
Should I do that now, Sadia?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, so what we did was a breakout with essentially 2 questions. We had a group of 8 individuals, and the first question was whether they currently are active in a nonprofit organization and whether they want to be or not, and whether they want to be supported or not in that activity. And the majority of the responses were that no, they are not currently active in nonprofit organizations, primarily because of all the transitions related to Best Start. And I'm not familiar with all of those transitions, but that there was interest to learn more about how to be active in nonprofit organizations. The second question, and this was steered by me, Dr. Grant, was when you begin to talk about the relationship of data for a nonprofit organization, 1, in how to secure it, and 2, what to do with it, I posed the question to our group of whether they knew how to secure data. And when I say secure, I just mean how to get data. I'm not even talking about how security associated with how you store data. And the question, or the answers were unanimously that no, they did not know how to get data. And so I guess that's what we would push back into the main group. And I know just from experience that's a very complicated question with a lot of layers. But maybe we can focus it around surveying and how surveying leads to data.
I think that's an important answer, Sergio. Thank you for asking that very important question. And I think your group had a great idea in exploring that. There have been a lot of transitions where individuals have not been able to re-engage with different nonprofit organizations that they have been involved in, but we'll also see new organizations pop up to serve a new need. And so maybe they can participate in those. Additionally, We'll see other previous nonprofits changing their mission to serve another population or to do something a little bit differently that they can participate in. Surveys are one of the top ways that organizations use to collect data. They oftentimes do surveys to find out what the community needs, how supported the community or the people who are being served feel by the services. And so getting information through surveys is a really valuable way to collect and secure data. Another way that we use are focus groups and interviews. Those are two other ways that people are able to collect data. And so when we look at the population being served, sometimes organizations create what we call a structured interview. That structured interview means that everybody is asked the exact same questions. And it's similar to a survey, except that the answers are not necessarily chosen, meaning that they're open-ended. And what an individual would do after that is they would take the responses and they would do what we call code them. Those responses would be coded into a couple of different buckets. And then you would take that information and say, you know, we surveyed 100 people. Out of that 100 people, 75 of them said that the services they received, they felt were beneficial. Now, even though you could ask that question in a survey, and the survey question would say, do you believe these services are beneficial? And it would say yes or no. And people on the survey would get to check yes or no. Through an interview, through a structured interview, you would ask a question that was an open-ended question that would tell you whether or not the individual were benefited from the services or did not benefit from the services. But the interview would then also give you additional information on why they felt they benefited or why they felt they did not benefit, even though it would still go into a bucket of beneficial or not beneficial, just like a survey. But then you get this additional layer of information where maybe you'll learn what you need to do to make the services beneficial that you weren't doing, or continue to do some of the things that you were doing in order to maintain the benefits of the particular service that you're providing. And so those things are really important in order to collect data. So I know we had a second group that we also want to hear from, but Sergio and your group, thank you for that thoughtful set of discussion pieces.
So yeah, our group, we talked about a few things. One of them was about the data collection, but more around understanding, you know, why particular data is being collected, right? That oftentimes, you know, especially with Best Start, there's a lot of assessments and a lot of surveys that occur, but it's not always super clear as to, you know, what that data is being collected for. And so we talked about, you know, that in the future, that they have every right to say, you know, before we participate, we want to understand completely why this is being done, right? And I think I love these questions because we actually do have a module around research and data collection in nonprofits. And so that might be something that we can look at, another module that we could look at delivering in the future, where we really just spend a lot of time talking about data collection. That could be really useful for the group. And then the other thing Officer Hill was asking earlier about minutes, right? Like the importance of having minutes and at meetings. And really, you know, early on you heard Donald talk about liability and also about lawyers, right? Having lawyers on your board, having a lawyer to represent you as a nonprofit organization, and having minutes as a part of your board of trustees or board of directors is a part of your legal responsibilities, right? So in order to be a valid organization and a valid board of directors or board of trustees, you need to take minutes at every meeting. And that doesn't mean that somebody has to record the meeting, which is helpful, but at the very least, somebody is, oftentimes their role with the board is they're the board secretary. And that secretary's responsibility whether, you know, that's their title. So it doesn't mean that it's a woman or, or anything. It just means that that person, male or female or otherwise, is responsible for writing down the important parts of that meeting, right? Really writing down everything that happens at the meeting, especially things like a vote, like maybe you're voting on the budget. So you need to record that everybody in the meeting voted on the budget, and how many of the people who voted yes, and how many people voted no. And then once you have that for every meeting, that those documents, those minutes, those notes you take need to be accessible to the public, because nonprofits are public organizations. So anybody who asks you, if anybody says, I want to see the minutes from your board meeting, you need to be able to provide those to them so that they can see them. They have the right to ask for them, and anybody has the right to see them. So you yourselves, any nonprofit organization that you know of or that you work with, you can say, I want to be able to read all the minutes from your board meetings. Where do I find them? And legally, they need to be able to provide you with that information. So that was some of the highlights from our conversation.
That is awesome, and such an important piece of the conversation. When we talk about those minutes, like we said earlier, they are legal documents, and the nonprofit is required. I'm just plugging my power in. Sorry, guys. The nonprofit is required to have those accessible. Now, let's be clear. That doesn't mean that they're going to want to share them. That doesn't mean that they are going to say, oh, thank you so much for asking for the minutes. Here they are. It may be a thing to get them. I saw a hand go up before we jump back into the slides.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a little bit of clarification, Officer Hill. One of the things I mentioned in the breakout room is about the term limits. I work with a lot of different 501(c)(3)s, and especially with founders, and these are serious stakeholders that are in the community, and they're not terming out of nothing, because they're either the founder of their 501(c), or you can even go as far as looking at a church where you see a pastor. He's the pastor and he sits on the board, and he's the pastor of the church, and church is a 501(c). So what I'm not understanding is, I know for a fact that many people stay on boards forever. And I'm wondering, is that some kind of violation, or is there some kind of workaround?
There's a workaround. That's a great question, Officer Hill. And so, for instance, we have certain individuals in the bylaws who are slated to be on the membership of the Board of Trustees. So, for instance, if the executive director founded the organization and the bylaws say that the executive director sits on the board, which they normally do, that individual will be one who would not term out of the board. That would likely be who the pastor was at the church who you're talking about. They would be, quote unquote, the executive director of the church, or the bylaws state that the pastor remains on the Board of Trustees for the entire time. It may also be written into the bylaws that certain founding members remain on the board at all times. And in other times, there is in fact a violation of the bylaws. People are not terming out in the way they should. I've seen boards like that as well. People are overstaying their limits on the board, and that's dangerous. It creates nepotism. It creates an echo chamber. It doesn't bring in new and innovative ideas. And so that's a challenge. And so, Officer Hill, I would encourage you to encourage the members of those boards to look at those bylaws to make sure that they're in compliance. Because remember, attorneys it only takes one lawsuit for a nonprofit organization to go under. And attorneys will look at those minutes and those bylaws. And if they see, let's say if they see somebody on a board who's done something egregious, something really bad, and they see that person should have termed out of that board years ago, what they're going to presume is that the organization is complicit in their bad behavior. And suddenly the organization goes under so much more scrutiny than they would have prior to this activity. And so board term limits are really critical. And any boards that you all work with, I would encourage you all to make sure that they're attending to those limits and paying attention to the members who they've allowed through the bylaws to stay on the board forever. And that you may want to encourage them, hey guys, it may be time to reevaluate or re-look at that particular clause in the bylaws. Very important question. So engage in continuing professional development and education. All boards should be staying up on top of what's happening. Right now, every single board in the country, in the world, needs to understand to a higher degree than they ever have before, technology. We've even seen Congress meet and vote now via Zoom. And originally they weren't going to do it. They say, if we can't meet in person, if Senate can't meet in person, we're not meeting. They didn't have a choice. And so this continuing education and professional development of board members, of participants of the organization is critical. Right now, we're seeing a lot of equity, diversity, and inclusion programming. And that may be something that you need to bring to your organization to say, hey guys, we're serving this population, but there's something that we're not doing exactly right. I did a presentation for a Latinx serving organization who wanted to expand their reach to the Black community. So we did a workshop surrounding that. We have some organizations that don't necessarily have the foundation to necessarily work with the LGBTQIA community in the way that they could in an empathic way. That may be some education that you have the organization engage in. Regularly assess performance of the board and the executive director. That was the last bullet on the previous slide to really pay attention to. The Board of Trustees is responsible for doing the performance evaluation of the executive director. The executive director is the only employee of the Board of Trustees. And if the Board of Trustees is not doing their job at managing the executive director, that is an open space for so many bad things to happen. Whether we're talking lawsuits, whether we're talking unethical behaviors, whether we're talking money laundering, all those things have happened as a result of a Board of Trustees not adequately managing an executive director. That's a really, really important note. And to that end, like many of us in our job roles, we get an evaluation from our boss. The Board of Trustees needs to have a proper evaluation tool in order to provide the executive director feedback to say, listen, the things that you did this year were not aligned to the mission, and these are the things that need to happen this next year. That same way, the board needs to evaluate themselves. Were they effective at raising the money that they were supposed to raise this year? Were they effective at bringing in new board members? Were they effective at creating a continuity model? And the note that I didn't mention last time when we were talking about succession planning, what I didn't say was that you want to make sure that your executive director and the chair of the Board of Trustees has an interim plan. What that means is that if something were to happen to the executive director tomorrow, that there was somebody who could step into their place immediately and run the organization on an interim basis. That's what succession planning is. You need those plans in place for both the executive director and for the chair of the board. And so oftentimes it will be the vice chair of the board who is identified to step up as the interim. With the executive director, depending on the structure, there may not be another person internally who's naturally ready to step up. If that's the case, you want to work with your executive director on identifying someone and training them up right now so that they could step into that interim place with the support of the village, right? With the support of the board, with the support of the staff, so on and so forth. But given our current times, not having a succession plan is dangerous. It might be one of the biggest risk factors to organizations right now, because if somebody falls sick with COVID or anything else, if they're out of commission for 2 or 3 weeks, your work has to continue. So those are important pieces to pay attention to. We've talked about the financial model of the organization and what that means, and looking at trends in your area of work. And so right now we're seeing homelessness trend upwards in LA County. If your organization works with homeless families, you need to understand that there are going to be more grants out there for homelessness because they're seeing the trends go up. What do you need to do to access those additional dollars? Things like that. Next slide, please. Three other things they do right here: explore new partnerships and create auxiliary businesses. It may not be that they create a new nonprofit, but they access other populations and other groups. Nonprofits have to think with an entrepreneurial lens. Even though they're not making profits, they have to think with the business mind. And that's important. Use technology to cut costs. How can you make it such that you're not printing 1,000 sheets of paper every week, and that you create a cloud-based system where everybody gets their documents on the cloud? Lots of boards I sit on, they don't have minutes waiting for you when you get to the board meeting. Well, when the world was open and we could go to a board meeting, they didn't have minutes sitting in front of you. Everybody got an electronic copy of the minutes, and they were able to pull them up on their phones or their tablets or whatever. And that saves thousands of dollars a year, because a packet of minutes, an agenda could be 30 pages easily. Excuse me. And finally, you establish clear agendas and you follow them. Good organizations follow them. Speak about the difference between profit and nonprofit, Officer Hill. Yeah, there are lots of differences between. We can go to the next slide too, Michelle, because I'll incorporate some of that into this response. When we talk about nonprofits and for-profits, we're looking at the different structure as far as the state is concerned, as far as the federal government is concerned, but primarily what happens to the money that comes in. The foundational difference between a nonprofit and a for-profit organization is that a nonprofit organization is responsible to take all the money that they make that goes outside of their operational funds, meaning that if it takes $50 million to operate per year and they bring in 55 million, that extra 5 million has to be placed back inside the organization. For-profit organizations, they're able to take that 5 million and they may split it amongst the people for profits. They may share it with stakeholders if they're a nationally traded organization, so on and so forth. Was that your question?
I thought there were nonprofits. I know the difference between nonprofit and profit, but I thought there were nonprofits for profit where you could be a nonprofit, have a nonprofit status, and then still have a profitable business.
No, and it depends on how people describe profitable, right? And so you could take that money and pay the executive director and other employees higher rates, but that's still going back into the business. So a nonprofit organization can bring in more money than they spend, but that money has to be baked back into the business. So it's still technically operating according to the nonprofit rules of the state.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we won't go through these very specifically, but there are certain committees at each nonprofit that have to be in place legally. So every board has to have a chair of trustees and governance, and they should have a charter that says what they do. Finance and operations. Next slide, please, Michelle. And these all describe what these committees do. You guys can read these in your own time, but it is indicated through law that many of these committees are required as a part of your board. Fund development and advisory committee. Again, these are different spaces, and you have to pay attention to the bylaws because they will tell you whether or not your organization has these committees. Even if you can't serve on a board, some of the board committees allow for non-board members to be on those committees. So let's say if you want to participate on the advisory board and they're welcoming new members, You may not have to be a member of the board to serve on a board committee. Now, there are other nonprofit organizations that require you to, in fact, be a board member to serve on the committee. So you'd have to pay attention to that as individual. Next slide, please. And finally, just another committee. This is the audit committee as far as financial reporting. And none of these take responsibility for the work of the organization. So just because you have a finance committee at a nonprofit organization, it doesn't mean that the nonprofit organization doesn't need to have an active bookkeeper or accountant. All right, an executive committee, long-range planning, evaluation. This is the committee that will oversee a lot of the things that we've talked about. So everything that we've talked about that leads up to these discussions, they fall into or under the purview of one of these board committees to oversee and to make sure that it's happening. Again, when you don't have a good functioning board, you allow for opportunities for an executive director to go rogue. Granted, we know that most people are operating with integrity, but if there's not a systems of checks and balances, it allows for things to get really bad. I think that is the last one of this one, Michelle. So this next slide, after looking at all of the committees that a board must have, these are the 3 levels of responsibility that we're going to talk about. And again, this is kind of a summary of everything we've already shared. And so duty of care, these are the 5 fiduciary responsibilities of a board. And one of the first one is duty of care. That means orientation and ongoing training for board members, making sure everything is mission focused, as we discussed earlier. Confidentiality is really critical. Understanding board confidentiality, resource stewardship. That means bringing in resources, even if they're not financial resources. It may be a partnership with a local sandwich shop that is willing to provide lunches for your clients once a month. That is a resource that's really important. Attending meetings, preparing and engaging, and overseeing the executive director. Again, this is a review of everything we talked about already, but it's putting them into these buckets of responsibility. So the first is a duty of care. Next slide, please. Duty of loyalty is the next fiduciary responsibility of the board. Mitigating conflicts of interest, meaning that a new board member can't have an investment necessarily, a financial investment in some of the outcomes of what you're doing. And so you want to make sure that there is no conflict of interest. If the executive director is running a program that is the opposite of what he's running with you all, that may be a conflict of interest. Paying attention to your trustee hat over what I say your parent or community member hat. Knowing the difference. Many of you will go into an organization as a parent, as a grandparent, and then move into a fiduciary steward of the organization. It's important that you're not wearing your parent or grandparent hat as you go in to work the responsibility of the organization. Being able to separate those two is really important. And then don't use the position or information for personal gain, obviously. That's critical and really important. Next slide, please. Duty of obedience is fine. I think I messed this up. I think there was supposed to be duty of obedience up where it says duty of loyalty, because we just did that. So duty of obedience, using resources appropriately and operating within the law, the nonprofit law, the employment law, all those things are really, really, really important. So again, these last 3 slides kind of capture all the pieces that we've talked about. And the reason why we did it this way for the summary was to indicate that everything we talked about has a place on the board where it's being held responsible for, right? And so we say we have to do all these things to support the executive director, but those come through board committees. If the board's not functioning, the nonprofit is going to hurt. Again, if the board's not functioning, the nonprofit is going to hurt. So it's your responsibility to ask those questions. Remember, don't be blockbuster. All right, so Michelle, I think these next pieces just go into some added information, looking at the risks of confidentiality and things like that. I'm actually going to have to hop off, and so I do apologize. It was so great seeing you all. Like I said, there's just a few more slides to go through that Michelle will go through to talk about some deeper dives on this stuff, but we've gotten through the bulk of the content, and these things just dig in a little bit more and would be great for some of the breakout group discussions or some of the smaller groups if you have any of those. I'm so sorry I have to leave us early, everybody, but it was such a pleasure seeing you all again. And Michelle, Sadio, and Sergio will check in sometime later on in the week. You're still on mute, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Before you leave, do we have your contact information? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Officer Hill, can you hear me?
Yes.
He did not hear me, huh?
No, that's okay, but we'll make sure that everyone has Dr. Grant's contact information.
You'll be able to hear, you'll be able to get the information. So sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. You'll be able to get information. We've got a few more slides to share with you guys. So the next one is around confidentiality. You know, confidentiality is critically important. And, you know, one of the issues is a confidentiality statement. You know, you're going to hear us talk about lawyers and legal issues as they relate to the board, because that, you know, the board of directors is running a business. And so, of course, there are a lot of legal responsibilities involved with that. And so usually there's a confidentiality agreement that all board members have to sign. A lot of organizations have these confidentiality agreements in place. So when you join, you have to sign the confidentiality agreement, and then they usually renew it once a year so that it's up to date. So, and the confidentiality agreement will basically state that much of the information that they're being privy to. For example, if you have an organization that is a mental health organization, and you know, you might be discussing specific issues related to, you know, different people that you serve, you know, that confidentiality agreement says that you're not going to share information about the people that you serve that would be sensitive information, right? That legally you can't do that. So that's the importance of having confidentiality agreements. Okay, and then this next slide is about policies and procedures, and again, the role of legal counsel in those policies and procedures. So again, policies and procedures can relate to things like human resource policy and procedures, right? What kinds of employee policies and procedures are in place? Policies and procedures as they relate to the board of directors. The bylaws that we just spoke about earlier are an example of policies and procedures. Most organizations will have their bylaws reviewed by a lawyer to make sure that they have been written correctly and that they have included everything that they're supposed to include in the bylaws. So once again, we can't sort of underestimate the need or the importance of having a lawyer involved with your board, either as a member or as somebody that the board is paying to look at their policies and procedures, or even to write the policies and procedures. Okay. Lastly, there's this question about, is there a schedule for periodic board review? What are the protocols for assigning responsibility of those reviews? Again, earlier we talked about the different committees of boards. Often there will be an executive committee of the board. The executive committee of the board is usually comprised of the chair of the board, the secretary of the board that we talked about earlier, and sometimes there's a vice chair of the board, like sort of like the vice president, right? And then there's also the treasurer, and that member of the board is most responsible for overseeing the budget. So usually those members comprise the executive committee, and that executive committee is typically charged with discussing things like, is it time for us to review our policy areas? Is it time for us to, update, the policies that are related to our board or to the organization? Oftentimes, the executive director or the CEO of the organization participates with the executive committee to talk about reviewing policies and procedures at all levels of the organization. This is an example of one resource, that folks can access. I've spoken with Sadio, and part of what we're going to do before these 3 courses, you have 3 classes. This is one of 3 classes you're going to take. We're going to come up with a list of resources in English and Spanish that you'll be able to access to give you more information about nonprofit governance and nonprofit management. We realize that we are talking about a lot of different components related to nonprofit management, and you're not going to be able to process all of the information just from this class, right? There's a lot of information, to understand. Our goal is to make sure that at least, you have a pretty good understanding of how nonprofits are supposed to work. So that way, as you're engaging with different nonprofit organizations, you're clear. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come to the end of this. And what I'm going to ask is if somebody else who has that little chart, I know Sadio and Catherine, if one of you can share your screen to show the network systems icon. Do you have that?
Yes, I'm pulling it up right now.
Okay. So one of the things, Best Start year 3, right, is going to be a different structure completely, right? It's a different structure. And so in year 3, you're talking a lot about networked systems, right? I don't want to confuse terms, right? We talk a lot about systems change. So in order for us to better teach you all, right, or share information around systems change, in this year, we want to be clear that people understand what are all the systems we're talking about, right? How can we talk about systems change if you don't understand what systems we're referring to? So there are a lot of different kinds of systems, and nonprofit organizations are a part of these systems. And so I wanted to be sure that in this session that we connect, the relevance of learning about nonprofits to the current structure that you're going into for year 3 of Best Start. So when you're looking at this, you can see here are the 4 communities, right? West Athens, Watts Willowbrook, Compton East Compton, and Broadway Manchester. You guys are the Best Start, local councils, and you have your own system. So let's be clear, your local council has its own system, and your local council wants to be able to connect with the other systems around you. And some of those systems are going to include like the school system. It's going to include the city council and the LA County systems, right? Each of those levels have systems. The city has its own building, it has its own offices, it has its own services. The County of Los Angeles has its own offices and programs and services, right? And so nonprofit organizations, is this the whole graphic, Claudia? Can you just go ahead and put the whole thing up there? Yeah, just put the whole thing on here, right? So, and I apologize that this isn't in Spanish and English. I'm sure that this has been provided in Spanish. Is that correct, Sadio or Catherine or Veronica, that this infographic has been provided to leaders in Spanish?
Is there Spanish on this one?
All the Spanish words are in this one.
Oh, I see. It's okay. Sorry, my brain wasn't my brain wasn't focused on the Spanish. It's in both languages. Good. Okay. So so in looking at this, you know, nonprofit organizations are a part of these systems at work. And so nonprofits are a system all by themselves. And so we want you all to understand how nonprofits function in this system, right? And so nonprofits, you know, basically what we've learned today, that nonprofits are essentially, you know, a business organization that has to focus on one. You know, Dr. Grant was using Blockbuster as an example because nonprofits, even though they're called nonprofits, they're still businesses and they still have to figure out how to survive, right? Nonprofits have to make money. They have to have budgets. They have to have policies and procedures. They have to have lawyers. So just understanding all of the different responsibilities of a nonprofit will help you as leaders understand that when you're working with nonprofits, that these are the different. Thank you. So that you understand the different ways that nonprofits are, one, what they're worried about, you know, like what are the different things that they need to do just to survive. And then, right, what they're concerned about when you're interfacing with them for your, you know, for your local council. And Community Health Councils is a nonprofit, right? So this is, you know, this is a way to kind of, in some ways, right, understand what are all the different responsibilities that an organization like Community Health Councils has. First 5 LA is a nonprofit, but it's a little different. I want to be clear. First 5 LA has a different structure, right? First 5 LA's board of trustees, many of them are members of the LA County Board of Supervisors. So First 5 LA is an interesting organization in that it has many of the same systems at work that we talked about today as a nonprofit, but it also has other systems involved because they're working with the County of Los Angeles very closely, and they're really overseen by a commission that's part of the county. So we didn't talk about the county system today. We talked about nonprofit systems, right? So just wanted to clarify, you know, that there are a lot of systems at work, and we're only today talking about the nonprofit, you know, as a system, right? So I just wanted to make that connection. So we can go ahead and stop sharing the screen. And I want to just thank everybody for their patience in supporting this, you know, class today, because we've certainly gone over time. We are recording. One of the questions I asked in our small group, I want to ask to everyone, which is, when we share this information with you, is there anybody here who feels like they need to receive this in hard copy? Do you want us to print out the information and mail it to you? Will that make it easier for you to digest it? Okay, great. So we have Rita Flowers wants to have this information. Anybody else?
Wilma Haynes.
Mary Lee, okay.
Wilma Haynes.
Wilma. Who else would like information printed out? Patricia? Anyone else? Veronica?
Not for this one, but maybe in the future.
Okay. And was that Officer Hill who said not for this one, but in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Yo quiero.
I say if you can email it, I can print it out myself.
Okay. Renee can- Okay.
Michelle,
Yes.
okay, if you email it, I'll print it. Read
Yo
it.
también lo quiero.
Okay, Miss Rita can print it out if we email it. Got it.
Uh-huh.
Jackie.
Jackie? Yeah, I've got Jackie. Yes, I got Jackie. Anyone else?
Alejandra. Sí, yo también lo quiero, Alejandra, por favor.
Mary? Yeah, I'm going to put Mary. Okay. And
Gracias.
all right. So, okay. So I just wanted to clarify that. Then we will work on now. We'll work on printing stuff out and getting that sent out to you guys who asked for it, because I want to make sure that people receive information in a way that works best for you. And I know, you know, it might be a little harder or take us a little longer to get it to you because we're not in the office every day, just so folks know. Most of us are still working from home and not going to the office. So it might take us a little longer to get things to you, but we will get them to you.
Michelle,
Yes.
so when it gets emailed, the audio version is going to come with it?
Yes, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, and as soon as this is done, Sadia will be able to download the audio recording and she'll send the link, and then people can listen to it again.
Cool, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to give a few minutes for Sergio to make a little bit of an announcement about our alumni. I know everybody's not here, and we do plan to send out information. So Sergio, do you want to say a little bit about our alumni group that we're going to be launching, that you'll be leading?
So Sadio and Michelle and I are putting together an alumni group from the first 3 modules. And I'm going to be contacting people individually to see if they'd like to join us in that network. And we have been waiting on the certificates. Have those gone out? Veronica Lopez, do you know?
Yes, Sergio, they went out. Veronica's left the call, but the certificates for the first few modules did go out.
Okay. And so we're going to be putting together a nice group to be able to detail these types of things, kind of like the small groups that we were putting together at Holman when we were all able to be together.
Thank you, Sergio. And to kick off the alumni group, we're going to have a graduation ceremony. So we are planning a graduation. It will be on Zoom. It will be on Zoom, but the good news about that is you'll be able to invite your whole families. So everybody can watch you get your certificates on Zoom, because you'll have them and you can hold them up and share them with us. And Dr. Grant and hopefully the president of Pacific Oaks College will be on the call to congratulate all of you for completing the modules that you've completed. And so we're really excited about having that graduation ceremony with everyone. And we will also at that time launch our alumni. And our alumni for graduates like yourself will include having different resources continue to be available to you, and different opportunities for you guys to get together and talk more about how you might improve your leadership, you know, as peers, as friends, as leaders who are working in communities. So we want to continue to create ways for you to continue to build on your skills and to interface with each other just around, you know, how to continue to grow and learn together. So any questions for us before we end our call and give you back your day because you have all been very patient. Yes, Miss Patricia and Rita. So let's have Patricia.
Yeah, I got to tell, I had to step away in reference to the alumni group. What was the purpose of that again?
Oh, the alumni group will be for our Leading for Equity graduates, and we're going to start a group where you guys are able to continue accessing resources to help build your leadership, and also access and be able to spend time together, you know, to learn more information or just to share with each other, support one another. So we're going to start creating opportunities for that.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. And Miss Rita? You're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You stated that the recording would be coming with the email.
Yes.
Can we record it, tape it ourselves so we can have it besides just having it on the email, or how does that work?
So what will happen is once you receive the recording, you'll click on it and you'll be able to download it to your computer if you like. So that way it'll live. If you have enough space, like, you know, you need enough memory in your computer or your device in order for the full class to be downloaded, and then you'll be able to listen to it.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, what we'll do is we will upload this to YouTube. So that way, all you have to do is click on it anytime and you can listen to it. So you don't have to be able to download it, because we're going to upload it to YouTube, send you a link, and that way you can just watch it on YouTube whenever you want.
Oh, that's all new. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you ever use YouTube, Miss Rita?
Yes, but I don't know how to use it yet.
Okay, well, it will be easy. It'll just be a link, and all you'll have to do is click on it, and it'll automatically open and start playing for you.
Okay.
Long as you have internet, that's it.
Yes.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
Any other questions? Am I missing? Let me check my chat. This looks good. Okay, you guys are awesome. It was really good to see everybody. Very, very excited to have you back in class. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Alejandra, cuídate. Gracias. Gracias, Bibi. Gracias.